because the Bank of England has also cut its growth forecast for 2025 in half. Now, Keir Starmer's government, like so many governments before, is banking on growth. And that growth is just not coming fast enough. Now, of course, ministers are keen to remind us of the economic situation they inherited again and again and again.
We have inherited a projected overspend of £22 billion. A £22 billion hole in the public finances now.
The £22 billion black hole in our finances.
There was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances.
There's a £22 billion black hole.
We inherited a £22 billion black hole in the public finances.
You got that right. But at what point can Labour no longer blame the previous government? At what point do they have to take ownership of sluggish growth as something that's happened under their watch? And the truth is, they can't really choose the answer to that. Others will choose it for them. Just listen to this now from the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey.
Metrics of business and consumer confidence have deteriorated over recent months, and contacts of the bank's agents report that consumers are more price conscious and holding back on spending.
Now, I'm just going to translate that from banker speech into language the rest of us can understand. He's basically saying businesses and consumers are increasingly worried, and things have got worse over recent months. So in other words, this isn't something you can just blame on the last guys, this is also on you. Now, it is important to say that the government knows they've got a growth problem. That's why they're tearing up planning restrictions, giving the green light to Heathrow Airport. It's also why Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband are on a visit in Lancashire, promising more investment in nuclear energy. So when can we expect all of these shiny new plans to feed through into the UK economy?
We think that some of what we're announcing today can be pushed through by 2032, so that's a really tight frame.
I mean, I think maybe we've got slightly different definitions of a really tight time frame. But look, the government deserves credit for long-term decision-making, don't get me wrong. But growth after the next election is not going to help the predicament they find themselves in now. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has tonight's first report.
Get Britain building again. That's the message from the Prime Minister and Chancellor. Get the economy going again, and we all get better off. Simple. But of course, it's never that simple. Take this hotel group. They build their own hotels and run them too. They want to expand, but everywhere they look, there are economic barriers. Higher prices, planning restrictions, not to mention the cost of labour after the budget pushed up national insurance.
It's a significant pressure to increase costs. However, as I said, we're taking a much longer-term view on this. There is a lot of people in the hospitality sector who are closing regularly because they just can't keep up with the increased costs.
It's all part of a bigger issue. For all the talk about growth, the economy is weak, very weak. And according to the Bank of England's latest forecast, weak growth and high inflation is the way of things this year.
On the question of activity in the economy, I mean, we have seen now a very weak profile, a flat profile of activity really since last spring. And that's caused us to have to revise down our view of this period.
It's pretty depressing, isn't it, the degree of growth? Everyone's been hoping for a bounce back, and now basically, at best, we're flatlining.
You look at Northern Europe, we're pretty much, it's a story that you can see elsewhere as well.
Nor does the bank forecast any immediate boost from the Chancellor's recent growth plan.
I hope that we'll start to see some effects on confidence, businesses particularly having confidence. Yes, I think this really is going to happen. These measures are going to happen, but the measures themselves, they all take time.
The bank cut interest rates to 4.5% and signalled there are more cuts on the way, a relief for homeowners like Martin in Retford. He's due to refix his mortgage in July, meaning a big step up in payments.
I'm actually now more inclined to leave it several more months to see if there's any further changes in the marketplace. I appreciate that's a bit of a gamble, but even if it's £50 per month on the mortgage, that can make a big difference to us at the moment.
The problem is, it's not like the economic backdrop is getting any calmer. Consider Donald Trump and his tariffs. Will they hit the UK too?
I don't see tariffs as positive. Obviously, we've got to give the administration time to form its policies. I worry, as I've said a number of times, about anything that seriously fragments the world economy. That's bad for growth.
And fears like that are already causing reverberations, including in unexpected places.
Did you know that even now, in 2025, the Bank of England has the second biggest store of gold bullion there in its vaults, literally underground? But they're having real trouble getting it out of these doors and around the the world because there's so much demand for that gold because people are so nervous about what's going on in the world. In other words, it's just another way that the Bank of England and the UK more generally find themselves in the centre of an economic storm.
But for some reason, the UK does seem to be worse hit than many other countries. Weak economic growth, high inflation. There's an economic term for that. Not growth, not building back better, it's stagflation. Ed Conway, Sky News.
Ed joins us here in the studio. Ed, it feels like a lot of the growth decisions they're making are, things that lots of people welcome but say it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to feed through in years, sometimes decades. And yet Rachel Reeves has got much more immediate issue than that, right?
Yeah, she does. I mean, and in a sense, I don't think she or anyone in the Treasury will be surprised about what we've just heard from the Bank of England. The economy isn't doing especially well at the moment. It's as Andrew Bailey was saying there, it's not just a UK problem. I mean, look across Europe. Look at what's happening in Germany. Germany's in recession. It's deindustrialising at a kind of almost unprecedented rate. So it's not just us, but it does rub off on us as well. And I think that for her, the issue is that if the Bank of England is cutting our economic growth forecast, then so too will the Office for Budget Responsibility. So that's the official forecaster. They come in with their forecasts next month, and that is the big thing that everyone's looking towards, because if they're cutting growth, then they're potentially going to be raising their forecast for the deficit. And if they're doing that, then it means those fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves herself set and left not that much leeway to hit, suddenly those are in jeopardy. And if they're in jeopardy, then suddenly she has to talk about cutting spending decisions. And how do you frame that in if you're growth positive? That's a lot of sacrifices. So I think there's a kind of proximate reason why she's probably concerned about it. And then there's a kind of more distant reason, which is, there's a lot of levers, and they are pulling a lot of levers that people like Andrew Bailey think are the right ones. But in a world where you've got chaos, where you've got tariffs coming in, where America is determined to promote economic nationalism, traditionally, an open economy like the UK is just not going to do well in that environment. We do well when it's globalisation. That's our big thing. We do well when people want to route money and through the UK. But the fact that, for instance, people are trying to take gold, quite literally trying to take gold out of the Bank of England because they are so nervous and they want to take it to America, it's quite a useful template for our issues here.
It's quite startling, to be honest, when you put it like that. It really does say...
They still say, I mean, Andrew Bailey was kind of adamant, they've still got lots of gold.
Yeah, don't worry.
They haven't run out of gold. There's lots of gold at the Bank of England. Yeah. But even so, it's a little unnerving.
Thank you very much indeed. Ed Conway there, Economics Editor. Now, Keir Starmer and his Energy Secretary Ed Miliband were in the northwest of England today, unveiling plans to allow smaller nuclear reactors to be built in England and Wales. Our political editor Beth Rigby was there. She asked the PM about today's economic news that we've just been discussing and if his plan would deliver long-term growth.
Prime Minister, the Bank of England's just cut interest rates, but it's also halved growth for 2025 forecast and raised the inflation forecast and said employers' national insurance hike will raise prices and hit jobs more than expected. It's a poor verdict on your budget and bad news for your growth plan. You must be really disappointed.
Well, what I think is significant today is that the interest rates have come down. That's the third cut in interest rates since July. That is really important.
So it's a growth
that
forecast.
means more money in people's pockets. Of course, wages are going up higher than inflation. Again, more money in people's pockets. But we're never going to turn around the economy in just 6 or 7 months. It was always going to take time. There's more to do. And that's why the announcement we're making today about nuclear, which is moving this on significantly to small modular reactors, getting again to the front of the queue in the world on that, making sure that can be done elsewhere across the country. So AI, data centres and nuclear can come together. This is hugely important. That means lots of investment into our country, which is then measured in jobs. So when it comes to growth...
They said that your NI is going to cut jobs. They said the NI hike will cut jobs.
Well, there's been an increase of, I think, 70,000 jobs since we came into power. So I think that shows the trajectory when it comes to jobs. But the only way to get sustained jobs in this country is to get the investment in. And that's why I'm really pleased that we've got the highest levels of investment now for 20 years. That's only coming because of the big decisions that we're taking. It will take time, but we've got to see these decisions through because this is what is going to turn the economy in the long run and make sure that people don't just see a line on a graph, but feel better off.
Your Chancellor said that she was not satisfied with the growth rate after these figures came out. Presumably you aren't either. You've also said you'll take on the blockers and the environmental zealots. So are you minded to grant consent for a giant new oil field, that's a Rosebank development off Shetland later this year? Are you minded to grant that?
Well, so far as Rosebank is concerned, as you know, there was a court that meant the licence had to be reconsidered. The criteria now needs to be reset, and then the application needs to come in, and then a decision will be made.
But are you minded to grant it if you can, if you want this growth?
What we said...
$7 billion investment, hundreds of jobs.
What we said at the election was we weren't going to interfere with existing licences. This process started, obviously, before the election. It'll have to go through the next process. But the mindset is, we know that oil and gas is going to be a big part of the future for many decades to come. We do need to transition to clean power. But in relation to this particular licence, it was granted in the first place. It's going back through a process. Now, I can't preempt the decision, but, you know, we did say that where licences have already been granted, we wouldn't interfere with them. It's gone through a different process. That the application has got to come back in again, so that we're not at that stage quite yet. Then there's got to be a decision made properly. But, you know, I'll be open with you. Oil and gas is part of the future mix for decades to come. But we do have an opportunity, particularly through nuclear, to get to a very stable environment when it comes to energy, which means not just lower bills, but them not fluctuating so much, which is why today's announcement is so important, not just for the sector, but for the everyday bills of businesses and families across the country.
Do you stick then, you just talked about bills, do you stick to your legend pledge to cut energy bills by as much as £300 a year by 2030? Are you recommitting to that?
Yeah, well, that is our aim. That's what we're driving towards. It depends on decisions like today and pushing them forward, because this is the future. To stop Putin putting his boot on our throat, which is what's happening all the time. We're exposed to the international market. We want to control our market. We said we'd aim for 300, up to £300 off. That's what I want to achieve. I also want the stability, and I want those bills to be low for a prolonged period of time. I think many businesses and many families have suffered their bills going up and down, and we can't have that volatility anymore.
All right, Prime Minister, thank you so much. Thank you.
Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Labour MP, Dawn Butler, and the broadcaster, Nick Ferrari. Great to have both with us.
Good evening.
Dawn, it's not great, is it, the growth forecast being halved? What do you make of it?
Well, I think, first of all, I should say on the £22 billion black hole is that when we get tired of saying it is when people start hearing it. And that's kind of one of the first rule of politics, and that's why it keeps getting repeated over and over again, so you can remind people that Labour inherited a huge mess. And with the forecast, the thing is this, at least it's still growth, right? I mean, when Labour took over, it's just, what, maybe 7 months ago, we were looking at going into recession. Now at least it's growth, and now at least people now are going to get more money in their pocket with their mortgage rates coming down. And if you remember, you know, Liz Truss's budget, you know, there's lots of people who weren't so lucky and were, you know, just one mortgage payment away from being homeless. So I think that, and as the Bank of England said, you have to give government time to turn it around.
Nick.
So that's it, is it? We're now going to remind people about Liz Truss's budget. That is the line of attack.
Oh, no,
never mind 22.
It's not attack, though, Nick, it's
never
facts,
mind.
right?
Here's a question for you. This is a weird media idea. 100 days. What happened 100 days ago? Rachel Reeves' budget.
Yeah.
100 days ago today. What has happened in those 100 days? Growth has slowed to an almost anemic level. Thousands of jobs have gone.
From where? In 2024?
Slowed from where it was when she stood up and gave her budget.
No,
Thousands of jobs have gone from Sainsbury's, Morrison's and other supermarkets. Many jobs have gone for... If you don't want to listen to me, listen to the bosses of just about every company from Brompton Folding Bicycles to Next, who say that we are getting close to a perilous spiral. That is the reality. April hasn't even kicked in with the hike in national insurance contributions. Meanwhile, the economy is absolutely on the ground. And that is the reality of 100 days of financial horror that they've unleashed. Why do you keep referring back to that?
Because it's important, right? Because because then you're not understanding the environment that the new government came into. What they've had to turn around.
Excuse me. Everything was, quotes, fully funded. All your moves prior to... Those are your work, not yours. Those were the shadow
the last government stuff was fully funded.
Everything, quotes, was fully funded. You and your senior colleagues had month after month after month to look at the hideous inheritance you had. I absolutely grant it. Hideous. And then you walk, it's absolutely terrible. The OBR told you how terrible it was.
Because it was worse.
But you had...
Because there was things that the government said they were going to deliver on. There was no money for it.
The shadow chancellor she was then had sight of it. And clearly no work was done.
She didn't have sight of all the details, Nick.
And now, by the way, I tell you what you have achieved. You have achieved an unprecedented rate of wealth creators leaving this country. Never before have so many billionaires and millionaires left the country. They are the people, the businessmen and women who create jobs, who create growth. They can't get on planes to Dubai and elsewhere quick enough.
Do you know what I think?
Good job you're expanding Heathrow. Good job you're expanding Heathrow, because they'll need another runway to take off.
Dawn, come on.
You know what I think gets forgotten? That actually it's the workers that generate the wealth of this country. So all the time you keep saying that the billionaires will know. And I think in the last decade, the difference between the billionaires and the workers has grown exponentially, and that shouldn't be the country that we live in.
Who creates the jobs? Who creates growth? It's not the state. It's not the state does not create.
It depends, doesn't it? It depends on what the priority is of the state. So if you look at what a Labour government's saying, is that we are the government for the workers. We are the government to make sure that businesses succeed and workers get paid properly.
Well, tell that to the workers of WH Smith, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Next, and everyone else that are losing their jobs. They're not the workers for them, are you? I haven't even talked about Port Talbot. And what about the AstraZeneca plant, right?
I guess
was going to be... I'm sorry.
Just to put the other perspective, Nick.
Yes.
You say that it's the businesses that create growth, but what the government does has an impact on growth too, right? So that's the argument from Rachel Reeves, that she's removing the barriers to growth.
What, with the national insurance hike?
Not with that.
I mean, that's nuts.
We're talking about, investing in, the projects that they saw today.
Yes, of course.
Investing in, removing barriers to planning, Heathrow Airport,
Let's
all this
not
kind
forget,
of thing, right?
after Heathrow and reservoirs and aqueducts or whatever it was, within 36 hours, AstraZeneca said, thanks very much indeed, we're not going to have that plant in Speke in Liverpool. And now it is reported they're going to Philadelphia. That tells you everything about your growth. I want this country to work. I've got children and grandchildren, but it's not.
But AstraZeneca is something completely different. And what
it was going to create thousands of jobs.
But what they were promised from the last government all wasn't laid out in detail. But that's not the thing. The thing is this.
Well, they were happy to do a deal until you guys got in.
The thing is this. You have to ask yourself, is the government using the levers at their disposal to accelerate growth in our country?
No.
Yes. Is this government
seriously,
using
Dawn,
the levers at its disposal to make sure that workers are paid
Please address
properly?
That. Lifting NI is a lever to growth.
Well, so I've met a business the other day who said, that it's difficult.
Come on, you're a candid woman. You and I have... You always speak the truth. Come on.
It's doable.
NI is crazy for growth.
I don't think you two are going to agree on this, I'll be honest. It's a very passionate debate. I love how well you get on
Well, fortunately, we do like each other, so that is the good news.
You'll be surprised, but no, we do. Lots more to come from both of you on the programme. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. We'll discuss Keir Starmer's plan to make immigrants wait longer before they become eligible for British citizenship, and Westminster chatters about a potential Conservative reform election pact.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon.
Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Oh.
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Welcome back. Well, after warning the Conservative Party on her watch was not going to come up with a raft of policies anytime soon, late last night, Kemi Badenoch made an unexpected policy announcement saying that immigrants should have to wait at least 15 years before they become eligible for British citizenship. It's a kind of policy perhaps designed to coax back voters from Reform UK. But she was pretty bullish when asked about the Reform threat.
Yes, Reform has 5 MPs. The Liberal Democrats have 70. We have 120.
But they're rising in the polls, you'd admit that?
I remember when the SDP was at 50% in the polls. What I'm trying to show people is that we are doing the real thinking, looking at legislation line by line, making sure that what becomes law in this country is what's good for the public. We don't have the 400 plus MPs that Labour has, but we are doing the thinking that's going to make people's lives better.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, joins us now. You can see what they're trying to do, right, with these policies, trying to ease the threat on the right.
Yeah, I was talking to a senior Tory grandee this week.
Tory grandee.
And I said, what do you think about how Kemi's doing? He said, she needs to come up with some policies. And here we are, as you say, late last night. A 4-point plan, I'll just summarise it. It's that idea of you can't claim indefinite leave to remain. It's going up from 5 to 10 years. Secondly, you mustn't have claimed benefits or relied on social housing. Thirdly, you've got to demonstrate your household be a net contributor. Not sure how they work that out. And fourth, you mustn't have a criminal record. Real, I suppose, red meat to the activists who say, yes, we have to the same sort of policies as Reform. In a week, as we know, when, of course, a poll had Reform 25, Labour 24, Tories languishing on 21%. I noticed that Chris Philp on Sky News today, the Shadow Home Secretary, said, no, of course it's nothing to do with Reform or opinion polls, but we all know it is.
So what I want to know, John, is what's going on with this pact? Is this a real thing? Is it a murmuring? What do you reckon?
Well, The Spectator, Katie Balls wrote in The Spectator that there had been informal talks. Now, today, Robert Jenrick, Bobby J, as MPs call him these days, who's much more sympathetic to Reform than Kemi Badenoch, talked about all the Conservative... he said, my mission is to bring all small C Conservatives back into the Conservative Party. That was talking to the Sun's Never Mind the Ballots podcast. But, of course, Kemi Badenoch is dead against it publicly. And Mr Jenrick was slapped down by the party saying that they're not going to have anything to do with that. Labour were talking about a dodgy backroom deal, as you might expect. Yes, Katie Balls wrote about it in The Spectator. Tory MPs talk about little else. Kemi Badenoch said during the course of her visit to Peterborough, I remember when the SDP was 50% in the polls. People have pointed out she was only 1 at the time. Was she reading Hansard's, you know? They used to say that about William Hague, didn't they, that he read Hansard's from a very young age.
There you go, that's a really remarkable reading skills. That's a real story.
I mean, I do remember. I was just early 80s when I was starting off as a political correspondent. I'm sure Nick's career was well established by then. But they did, as she said, she rightly said, they got to 50%. They won some by-elections. But in the general election after that, the Thatcher landslide of 83, OK, the Falklands War had happened, they got 25% of the vote. The Liberal-SDP alliance got 23 seats, of which the SDP only won 6. In the election after that, of course, Roy Jenkins lost to George Galloway. So the point, I suppose, is that it's hard for new parties to get established. But there's no doubt that Reform are making the running at the moment. We saw yesterday that Nigel Farage gave a wide-ranging news conference with about 4 or 5 decent news stories out of that. Kemi Badenoch goes to Peterborough, just a very short interview. And at Prime Minister's questions, as we know, she's all over the place. She raises about 6 subjects in the space of a few minutes.
I bet you were reading Hansard when you were a toddler, John. That's what I'm going to say. Thanks very much, John Craig there, our chief political correspondent. And the speculation around a Conservative Reform UK pact is likely to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be Conservative Homes Deputy Editor Henry Hill and the New Statesman's Associate Political Editor Rachel Cunliffe. Right, let's chat to Dawn and Nick, shall we? What do you reckon? A pact between the Conservatives and Reform?
For Reform to work, referring to John Craig's report there, they need to land a big name, OK? If Bobby J, to use Johnson, if Jenrick, I believe, was to suddenly think the grass is greener over there's a real opportunity, I think he would take quite a swathe. So you talk about the Suella Bravermans, I don't know that they shift the dial. If someone like that were to go to Reform with the following that he has within the Conservative Party, I think suddenly they're a totally different proposition. Both leaders say we're not interested. Farage says it. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But that, I think, would be a game changer.
Do you think Reform were a threat to Labour as well?
I think we should stop talking about it that way. Like, I get quite irritated when, like, oh, yeah, Reform. And, I mean, there's how many of them? 4 of them? One of them, they've got lots of problems in their party. It's a long way off before a general election. And I don't think, well, definitely the Labour Party should not be trying to appeal to Reform voters. What we should do is looking at people's problems, whatever that might be, and then talking about that and helping people, making sure they've got more money in their pocket, making sure they've got decent jobs, making sure they've got somewhere decent to live. That is the bread and butter of our politics and our socialist values as well. And
When's that going to start, then?
And that's what we need to focus on. Well, it has started, right? But
yes.
Granted, we've still got a long way to go, but we've only just started. So maybe in 3 or 4 years, when we're both hopefully here,
yes.
you're a married man and everything. Maybe
I know it broke your heart. I'm so sorry, Dawn. I know. I should have told you in advance.
Maybe, when we're back here, you'll be able to turn around and say, OK...
I would be happy. I would be delighted.
OK, I see what the Labour Party was doing.
I would be delighted.
And we can see the results of it. And it is going to take time. But, obviously in this 24-hour news cycle, people want things to happen quickly.
Do you think Reform are the real deal?
Depends what you mean by the real deal. I think they're the real deal for the Conservatives. I think they are deservedly all over the place. And John references the polling. I understand that they're even polling particularly well in Wales, where you've got, of course, the Senate coming up. Well, if they were to score well in Wales, again, to Dawn's point, I think that would be a wake-up call to Labour, because that, my God, that is like the real heartland, isn't it? But they've obviously latched onto something. And again, I know that it's probably a banned word for some, but the fact that Trump is doing what Trump is doing, and his friendship, however big it might be with Farage, and the fact that you look at the US economy, again, Farage can hinge off. He's a very... all the... Kem is desperate to get headlines. Starmer's... Actually, all it needs is Farage. He's on the front page of the London Evening Standard. He is actually making the running, isn't he? That's the reality.
He can say whatever he likes, doesn't he?
Like, so should Kemi.
But he's got no accountability. I mean, he can say whatever he likes. He doesn't have to have his sums match up. But what I did find interesting is that they said they want to renationalise water, and you had a lot of reform support is saying, well, this is a really great idea. And I'm thinking, hang on, that's a Labour policy, but it was never associated with Labour. And I think that's where we've got to make sure that our policies are very much grounded.
But one thing you and I
Labour.
do agree on, the policy that Sophie referenced, this idea, this immigration, it's just nuts.
Oh, yeah.
The one Kemi Badenoch put out. It's like they've drawn it up on the back of a cigarette packet with a 5-year-old in detention.
Yeah,
It is shockingly stupid.
Yeah, but she wanted some quick headlines,
So
and
again,
she's got it no matter
reform
how pathetic it
actually
is.
come out on top.
Yeah.
They're pretty smart at this.
So what do you make of the policy then? You're a fan, obviously.
I think it's unworkable. I had, as you did on Sky News, I had Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, on LBC. And when you start asking him questions, so anybody who'd be making a little bit north of £30,000, that's not enough. You have to leave the country. Well, who's going to make the cups of coffee? Who's going to make the beds in the hotels? And he said, well, we'll get the local, we'll get Brits to do it. Well, they ain't doing it now, so why are they suddenly going to do it then? It's just not joined up. It's panicky.
Yeah, stop panicking at the end of the day. I mean, you know, Kemi said that she was going to wait 2 years before announcing any policies. That was a good idea. You know, think about it. But no, people are panicking, and I think, reforms make it. Yeah, I do think reforms make it.
They've been Farage.
And I think, to be fair, I think some people in Labour have been panicked by reform. I said, stop panicking and stick to Labour's grassroots policies and put the country first, and that will work.
Thanks both very much. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, I'll speak to the former Justice Secretary Alex Chalk, who's returned to the legal profession, about why public confidence in the justice system is hanging by a thread. That's up next. Hello, welcome back. Well, I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that elements of our criminal justice system are in crisis. Prisons so overcrowded that the government's had to authorise early releases, delays in the courts, leaving victims of serious violent and sexual offences stuck in limbo for years. Well, earlier today I spoke to Alex Chalk, the former Conservative MP and Justice Secretary who lost his seat last year. But he has been busier than most ex-MPs. A couple of weeks ago, he successfully prosecuted a murderer. Thanks for being on the programme.
It's great to be here.
So, you've made legal history by becoming the first former Lord Chancellor to return to the criminal courts. Does it feel like you're kind of going back to having a proper job?
Look, I think anybody who goes into public life, I respect whichever party they're from, that is a proper job. But certainly going back into the courts, you really feel that it's the moment where so many of the things that you talk about in the abstract as a politician actually bump up against the reality of life in court, which in turn is considering what happens on the streets of, in my case, streets of Croydon. So, yeah, it's pretty real. You talked there about the streets of Croydon. You're referring to what you've done on a particularly harrowing, awful case recently, where you successfully prosecuted the killer of a 15-year-old girl. Yeah. What happened? Well, it is genuinely the most appalling case, and I can say that anybody who's a criminal barrister, you see some horrible, horrible things, and bluntly, you have to harden your heart and get on with it and do a job. But this was an affecting case. It was a young girl called Eliane Andam, 15 years old, in her school uniform, going to school, and there was a dispute over a teddy bear of all things, and there was this video that she posted about a minute before she was killed, and you saw she was bright and cheerful and happy, and then seconds later she was hacked down, and it was all caught on CCTV, bus CCTV, and it was a truly appalling case. The defendant was a 17-year-old boy, and yeah, the whole thing utterly, utterly dreadful. It feels like you have been quite affected by it. Yeah, I was. It was a case. There are two cases in my career. I've been prosecuting and defending, but principally prosecuting for very, very many years. And this, I think, was one of two that I was most affected by. There's something about, all deaths are a tragedy, of course, but there's something about when it's a child and over something so trivial. It was just utterly, utterly dreadful. And it was, I don't want to be too dramatic, it was a wicked thing to do, a wicked, wicked thing to do. You say how you kind of look at things with a different perspective now. You're almost like on the front line, if you like, of the justice system, whereas before you were, as Justice Secretary, as Lord Chancellor, in more of a political way. So I guess my question is, what would your kind of current self, Alex Chalk, the barrister, tell to your former self, Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary? What message would you give him? Well, it wouldn't be totally different. The reason why I say that is because one of the advantages from going into that job as a barrister is that I had experience of being in the courts, but also, guess what? I know lots of people. So the thing that people might not automatically assume is that even when you're sitting there at the top of the tree, you've got your contacts and friends messaging you. Alex, do something about this. No, literally. I mean, people saying at the Old Bailey, by the way, this defendant has been brought to court an hour late. We're sitting here waiting. So I was able, I think, to keep my finger on the pulse. But certainly the things that they told me about issues in the criminal justice system were things which I then saw. And so none of it came as a surprise. And they were things that I've been endeavouring to tackle. But I think what I would say, in a direct answer to your question, is, yes, you diagnose the problems. They really are genuine problems, and you've got to go about fixing them in the way that I was planning to, but got turfed out of office. What kind of thing? I mean, you mentioned there about delays to courts, backlogs. What do you think is the main issues in the justice system? OK, well, so it's really, really important to get a sense. So if you're a poor old consumer of the system, say you're the victim of some atrocious crime, the thing that will really upset you, and by the way, upsets me and society as a whole, is that the trial of the defendant in this case may not come on for 18 months or 2 years. Now, that is completely wrong for all those obvious reasons. A, for her, it's just horrific to have to wait. She lives with it every day. 2, people's memories fade. C, it's actually not great for the defendant. And by the way, for the criminal justice system, that person may be in custody awaiting their trial. So when people say, well, you've got this population pressure in the prisons, what they perhaps don't think is, well, what's the reason? One of the key reasons for it is there are more people in custody awaiting trial. Right? So the pre-trial detention population, the so-called remand population, has gone from about 9,000 to 16,000. Wow. So that's the principal impact on on the prisons. So you've got to address that. And, and the other thing that people perhaps have forgotten is at the time of COVID, we made a decision in Britain not to let prisoners out, even though Public Health England and Public Health Wales were saying, let people out because they're all going to die in prison. Mercifully, they didn't. Actually, they thought that 16,000, they didn't. But the United States released thousands of people. France released thousands of people. And so there is a lot of COVID impact, which we still haven't unwound.
Are we basically sending too many people to prison?
I think there's a very clear thing that you need to do. And what I would be doing if I were Lord Chancellor is this. I'd be saying, of those 70-odd thousand cases in the Crown Court, it is no longer acceptable, if you want to have enough capacity for the rapes to be called on at a sensible time and the murders, for the lower level offences, for example, somebody gets arrested and on arrest they assault someone, but it's a very low level assault, so it's not assault occasioning actual bodily harm or it's not grievous bodily harm. They can elect Crown Court trial in front of judge and jury, which will take a week for that trial. It could potentially bump out of the list a rape case. So those cases are going to have to be dealt with more efficiently, I think, by a judge and two wingers, two magistrates, rather than judge and jury, because it just takes too long. So I love juries. They're really fantastic. Keep them for the murders, keep them for the terrorisms, keep them for the arson with intent and the rape and the serious sexual assault. But they cannot be there for theft of a Mars bar, to my mind, or certainly not your second theft of a Mars bar.
Like other departments, the Ministry of Justice is going to have to try and find some savings of around 5%. Now, you know that department situation more than just about anybody. Are cuts to that level possible? And what would you do?
Look, it's so easy, right? And no criticism of the media, but they might say, all right, well, they will swallow hook, line and sinker when the government says, oh, well, we're going to do 5% cuts across the board. Of course, that's a completely lazy approach. The reality is the entire budget of the MOJ, which deals with over 100 prisons, all of those prison staff, all of the probation service, all of the courts, all of the court staff, all of legal aid, that entire annual budget, around 14 billion, is spent by the Department for Work and Pensions in 2 weeks. So my point simply is this. We actually have in our country, notwithstanding the points I've made about the criminal justice system, one of the best legal systems in the world. We have the second largest legal sector anywhere in the world. It's incredibly well regarded overseas, particularly our commercial court, etc., etc. For goodness sake, do not undermine this immensely important department and let DWP get off scot-free. To govern is to choose. That is the massive budget. If it were me, I would be going after that budget bluntly and not just saying, well, we're going to have this lazy thing of across-the-board cuts.
So, Ministry of Justice, you think should be protected from cuts?
I do.
And what happens if it's not? What kind of impact would that have?
I think it would be a massive false economy. I'll tell you why it's a false economy, because you would find a situation where confidence in the criminal justice system of people's ability to get justice for appalling crimes like rape just ebbs away. It's already under strain, I accept, because of all the reasons I talked about. That would fall away. There is a cost that comes to that. And I'm saying that for small savings, you'd be doing disproportionate damage. I think the British people now accept, I do, that at a time, certainly until recently, of relatively full employment, it is absurd that we are spending on working age benefits, more than we spend on defence, double what we spend on schools. And I think if you're serious about it, don't go after the justice system. Deal with the benefit system.
I guess some people listening to this would be like, the Conservatives also went after the justice system. If you look at legal aid, for example, in the 10 years of 2023, the legal aid budget was reduced in real terms by 728 million. I mean, that's nearly half the budget.
Well, look,
so that had a huge impact, right?
Two things I'd say about that. First, I certainly, when I was in office, jealously guarded the budget of that department, which, as I say, is a modest spending budget. But the second thing is, of the legal aid things you're referring to there, that was the civil legal aid budget, which was dealing with things like housing and social security, and they're things that were taken out of scope. If we're going to be credible and serious, I don't think that any credible or serious Lord Chancellor would be able to get another 700 million in. I mean, we'd all love that. We'd all love the moon on a stick, but I don't think that's going to happen. And so I think, I really hope that Shabana Mahmood is able to stand up to Rachel Reeves and say, listen, this matters to who we are as a country. It matters, frankly, to law and order, to confidence in the criminal justice system. For goodness sake, if you want to save some money, which is a perfectly sensible thing to do, don't come after our budget.
There was one other thing I was keen to get your view on, because a lot of people in your party, particularly the Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, have been criticising the Attorney General, who's had to recuse himself from some advice because of a potential conflict of interest with previous clients, including his representation of the former Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams. So Robert Jenrick told GB News the Attorney General's past is catching up with him. His murky conflict of interests absolutely stink. The British public will be asking, who does the Attorney General serve? I just wondered your view on that.
Well, look, it's perfectly legitimate. Everyone deserves a defence, right? Whether we like them or not. And sometimes there are some pretty unattractive people that have to have a defence. And look, we've got a history of that in this country. There were, British soldiers in America who were, in the time of the Revolution, who were accused of terrible crimes, and it was a subsequent president of the United States who defended them, even though it was an unpopular thing to do. So that's fine. However, I do think this has been badly handled by the attorney. So he stuck very much to this, oh, well, there's a terribly important custom and precedent that I can't possibly indicate there's been any legal advice. He should have been much, much quicker out the traps to say, I have recused myself from these matters, if indeed that was the position. So on the one hand, I don't criticise him for representing people. Everyone has to have a representation. I do think he's handled this unwisely, and I think he's made himself a target.
Do you think the attacks are a bit too far, though? Saying it's kind of past is catching up with him, murky conflict of interest?
Listen, I'm out of politics now, but when you're in politics, there is cut and thrust of it. And I think those people who are lawyers who go into it have got to recognise you're going into a political world, and that's part and parcel of it. And you can't, one can't sort of clutch one's pearls and say, oh, but I'm a lawyer, I'm immune from any kind of criticism. That's naive, bluntly. So yeah, there's a bit of cut and thrust there, but I also think that he could have handled it much more judiciously.
Right, let's get thoughts of Dawn and Nick, shall we? Lots to kind of dissect there. At the heart of it, he's saying Labour should protect the budget for the Ministry of Justice. I mean, do you think he's got a point, Dawn?
I think, first of all, he should admit that the Tories broke the justice system. The last 14 years, I used to be a magistrate, and I remember when they were closing all of the magistrates' courts, and we're like, why are they closing the magistrates' courts? And our lists are getting longer and longer, and just couldn't cope. And this was, the Tories used to be the party of law and order. They've shown themselves not to be. They cut the police, they cut the front end of the police officers, they cut the back end of the people that worked in the police. They essentially decriminalised rape. They definitely broke the system. And I mean, when our Lord Chancellor, Shabana Mahmood, came in, she had to make that difficult decision because the prisons were full. Now, I mean, I think when you've got a policy of building new prisons, that's a sign of failure. And it just shows that the last government was just a complete failure when it came to law and order.
Why is it a failure to build new jails?
I think we should do more beforehand in terms of making sure that people don't end up into a position where they end up in prison. But that will take a longer conversation, to be fair.
All right, okay.
But prisons are a sign of failure. I'm not saying some people shouldn't be locked up. Of course they should be.
OK. The question that's being asked is our justice system broken? Well, yes, clearly it is. And most of the breaking was down to the Conservative administration. Indeed, it has been reported that when the summer riots first kicked off, there were 8 prison spaces in the northwest of England. That is quite incredible. So the Labour government doesn't have a choice. They've got to let people out. It is going to need radical thinking. I don't know that I sign up to Dawn's idea. I do sadly think we need more jails. I think there was a jail building programme, which, as I understand, is still going on. But yes, you're right. Per head of population, we apparently jail more people than the whole of Europe. So something has to change. But to the question you put on screen for your viewers, yes, sadly, our justice system is broken, and it has repercussions across so many other areas.
And the Conservatives broke it. We agreed on that.
We agree. Yeah, I think there is a bit of agreement there, actually.
I agree.
It's quite refreshing, isn't it, I have to say.
He's a good bloke.
To hear from a politician who's gone into a job that is outside of the Westminster bubble. He's working on murder trials now.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, right? I mean, I had a job before, I had a couple of jobs before I went into politics. I was a computer programmer, I was a trade union official, and I do think you can tell the politicians who have had jobs beforehand and the ones who are just, political sort of wonks who are just always in the political game. And you need that. You need that, you know, diversity in there.
He came in and did a couple of call-ins, you know, I do on LBC Call the Cabinet, and he came in a couple of times. I found him hugely personable. I think he was a big loss, actually, to politics, a big loss to the Conservative Party, and I would imagine the folk of Cheltenham probably are missing him quite a lot. I think he was quite a good constituency MP, so he's a decent bloke, one of the better ones.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on Politics Hub. Speaking of having a job before, he was predicted to make a swift exit to California, but Rishi Sunak was in the Commons today, speaking, at all things, DEFRA questions. A case of how the mighty have fallen we'll discuss next.
Coming up on the UK tonight at 8, as the government decides to demolish the Grenfell Tower, we'll have reaction from one of the survivors who says bereaved families just aren't being listened to. Plus, a huge clampdown on mobile phone theft in the capital sees hundreds of arrests. But are police doing enough? And we'll be hearing from the man who donated his kidney to a total stranger after his own daughter died of kidney disease. All that and much more on the UK tonight at 8.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, even before he lost the general election, some of Rishi Sunak's Westminster rivals were saying that he would have moved to California by Christmas, raking it in as a Silicon Valley tech bro. But the former PM hasn't gone anywhere yet and even graced the Commons chamber this morning in the slightly unlikely setting of environment questions.
Rishi Sunak.
I welcome the government's focus in this area. One of the barriers that my small agricultural businesses face in supplying the public sector is the complexity of the contracting process. The Crown Commercial Service made significant improvements to their portal last year, but could I urge the ministerial team to build on that progress to make it easy, particularly small companies, to provide public sector food, which is what ultimately we all want to see more of.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful, not just for the right honourable gentleman's question, but also for his interest and attendance at DEFRA questions. We're honoured to have him here, and I'm very happy to look at what he's suggested.
Right, let's talk to Dawn and Nick. Time for our big debate on barriers that agricultural businesses face when they want to provide food to the public sector. Nick, what do you reckon? Lots of callers to LBC on this, I'm sure.
I think it would be a bit of a struggle. I mean, I do know that there's trouble down on the farm with this, of course, the tax and the budget 100 days ago, but I'm going to have to defer to the former Prime Minister. He's far, far higher on the preference. Obviously, he's angry about something.
And Dawn, what about the Crown Commercial Service? What do you
I think it's...
Are you equally mystified?
I think it's nice...
Can we go back to arguing about the budget?
I think it's nice that he graced the Commons with his presence. I mean, he's still an MP. I lost the bet. I thought he'd be gone in 14 days. But, you know, he's being paid as an MP, so he should be in Parliament a lot more. But I do, admire. It's not easy to have been Prime Minister and then you're on the backbenches and then you come in. I mean, I think Theresa May did it, with grace and passion. So I think it's a difficult thing to do. But if he's going to stay, so they're obviously scared of losing the seat, otherwise he would have been gone. But if he's going to stay, he needs to turn up more.
Yeah, it is quite. It must be so hard if you've just lost an election like that, like led the Conservatives to the worst ever defeat, and then just sit on the backbenches at DEFRA questions. But I guess it is also quite good to have former Prime Ministers and their experience in the Commons.
To Dawn's point, I mean, he does have to represent his people, and Richmond is obviously, there's going to be quite a degree of farming land. I'm afraid I'm not that familiar with it, but obviously there's going to be farming land. So he is doing what he's actually paid to do. So credit to him. He's toughing it out and he's representing his constituents, which he should be doing.
Yeah, and genuinely, there is a serious thing about farming. We were taking the mickey slightly there, clearly, but actually these are really important issues that he knows about, his constituents care about, and it's right to...
But I don't want this to turn into an episode of The Archers, because I really don't know where to go with this.
No, don't worry.
I know it's important. I'm going to go and research it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's highlighted it.
Tomorrow morning at 7 on LBC, I promise. Call me.
Wait, so you sort of think Theresa May is an example of a former PM who's done it well then, right?
Yeah, I think she was. I mean, she had a position in Parliament. You always knew where to find her, kind of sort of 3 rows up.
Yeah.
She's kept on the subjects that she was passionate about. Great.
Yeah, great. Thanks both very much indeed. Lovely to have you on the programme today. That is it from us this week, but I will see you on Monday at 7. Up next, it's UK Tonight with Sarah J. Me, but I'll see you next week.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
A police force has apologised.
If you wanted to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.